Wizard with a Gun was one of my most anticipated roguelites for 2023. It looked like an action-adventure game with some top-down shooter and sandbox elements, along with some city building outside of the run. A lot of people compare it to Don't Starve Together, which is another multiplayer open-world survival game that has a lot of crafting, and I've never really played it. Wizard with a Gun does also allow for co-op play, but I decided to play it alone in my playthrough. The story of this game has you travel back in time, collecting gears to repair the world and get rid of all the chaos which destroyed the world. Each run gives you 5 minutes to look around the biome, collect materials, weapons, gears, and then if you kill the chaos enemies that spawn, it gives you more time before the clock hits 0 and the world begins to end. The story of the game is strong, I feel, and the premise of it as a whole I'd say is good. What I was more intrigued about is the gameplay as a whole and how long this gameplay loop could actually be fun before it got more tedious, or if it even gets tedious after a certain amount of time. Each run has you scavenge whatever biome you're on, and if you have time, you're allowed to visit as many biomes as you wish, as the endgame map isn't too large, and it's quite easy to go from one area to the next once you have them unlocked. Every biome is filled with unique enemies and crafting items, whether it be for your bullets or potions. I'll say I do like the map as a whole and how every biome gives you better weapons than you previously had, but the game only has 4 weapons total with a shotgun, carbine, machine gun, and revolver. They just have different ranks that give them small buffs. Where the game stands out more is with all the different types of bullets you can have and all the combinations available. But at the start of the game, you'll most likely craft towards one bullet, as each bullet has a lot of upgrades to it, and all the upgrades rely on the similar currency of tomes. But I'll talk more about crafting soon. What's most important about the gameplay is the gameplay loop of the roguelite, and if it's good long term. And for me personally, it just missed the mark in my opinion. You set back time, you go kill some enemies and try to find your gears to fix the chronomancer wheel, and after you get them all in a biome, you fight a boss. The gunplay felt a little tedious after about 8 to 10 hours probably, but if you rush this game, I'd say you could beat the game within 12 hours. I did also tend to only use fire and freeze bullets. I'm sure trying out more combos like charming and healing bullets would feel different, or playing the game in co-op, but the gameplay loop for me as a whole, it just got a little tedious after about 8 hours. While the gameplay loop got tedious for me after about 8 hours, there was one part of the game that I tried to bypass and avoid as much as I can, and how it even almost made me quit the game after 6 hours, and it was the crafting. This is where the game shines and struggles in my opinion. Like I said before, the game relies on a lot of the same materials for crafting, but if you forget to store your items before a run and you die, then you lose all of the items you were holding on to and cannot get them back. But that's not the biggest problem with this crafting system. There is so many different systems to craft with multiple different furnaces to make regular ingots or electrical ingots, freeze sections, poison sections, regular healing items, and of course the giant upgrade system with bullets. They all take so many different materials, and you'll be walking around all your storage bins after a while trying to remember where you put what. The biggest problem is that these storage containers are not used universally, and what I mean by that is that you can't use items to craft from a storage unit if it's more than 1 square away from whatever crafting station you're at. Sure, you could just organize your systems and try to have them divided by sections, but I feel like eventually you're gonna get lost with how many items you get introduced to in the game and how you'll need wood everywhere or steel or glass chunks. I don't mind having all these items and all the different crafting available, but not being able to have them taken out of storage automatically just ruined the whole game for me. Like I said, after 6 hours, I was so frustrated not knowing where any of my materials were. Granted, it was my fault, but I was just so mad that I couldn't just universally craft everything out of all my storage containers that I almost quit the game. I had to spend 30 minutes off stream just organizing my systems, and that made the crafting more bearable for 5 hours, but granted, I was still a little lost on where my items were at times. I did beat the game after 17 hours, and I did spend an extra hour to get all the achievements, but at the end of the game, I threw my system out the window as there were just too many items to keep up with. The storage and crafting system is just too in-depth and reliant on the same materials for not being universal, and that was actually my biggest problem with the game. There's still more small critiques in this game that I will talk about in a little bit, but this crafting system was just so horrible, and if you play the game, I feel like you may feel the same way, and if you don't, well, it's just my issue, but I feel that one small change of universal crafting would do wonders for the game. I still enjoyed the game, it's just that really brought it down for me. Now let's quickly talk about biomes and enemies as a whole. The enemies stay fresh every biome, and they do get harder as time goes on as their level will increase, which you can easily see next to their health. So you need to make sure you're leveling up at least 1 bullet type so you can actually do damage. If you try to use a low level bullet on a somewhat higher level enemy, you will be shooting them for a very long time. I will say this game is very easy to get an insane build with, as the final biome I had a level 20 frozen bullet on a carbine and was killing everything relatively fast. But at that point, I was also ready to be done with the game, so I was more so rushing through it to get all the gears. But the biomes also get harder as time goes on, and you may need to upgrade your clothing to be more resistant to whatever hazard is in the biomes. Yeah, also, all your clothing items can get one little upgrade on them, which is another crafting thing you need to worry about, but they're just good little buffs, I would say. But the biomes, you have your usual biomes with poison swamps, the cold snowy tundra, and of course a desert that will catch you on fire. And each biome will bring you better materials for crafting and decorations you can scan to build in your base.
And I'll be honest, I didn't do anything towards base building at all. It doesn't really have any benefit to you besides looking nice. And this game only being in co-op, I feel, you know, the base building, it didn't really matter. If you like base building, I guess it's a nice addition, but I'd rather use my materials on actual things that help me.
So yeah, 4 biomes, with each biome having about 8 unique enemies and then finding chaos enemies as a run goes on.
I was expecting a little more, but for how long the story takes, it's not too bad. I will say though, the art style is absolutely fantastic.
Now I've talked a lot about the negatives of crafting, but I still have a few more critiques for this game that I feel could make it better, but don't affect it too much. The biggest one being only 2-player co-op. Now as someone who didn't plan on playing this with anyone, it doesn't affect me too much, but I do feel this game would be a lot more fun with more than one other friend. Next is a gameplay wise changes. When there's a lot of enemies on the screen and a lot of fighting, you can easily lose your character or not notice a hole in the earth that you can't walk over because it's blocked by like a box, and then you're stuck and you basically die. That happened to me a few times, and it was disappointing losing all my items that way. Maybe making objects easier to see through when you walk behind them or walk in front of them could help this, but it can get a little messy at times. And then speaking of messy, when all this fighting does happen, the game can start running a bit clunky and drop some frames for a second or two, which could really mess up your movement. I noticed those frame drops mostly past the tundra biome, but they become much more present later in the game. And then the last critique gameplay wise is make the character a bit faster or speed potions more effective. I said you can get through the world fast, but that doesn't mean your character is fast. It just means the world is kind of small. The game can feel pretty slow, and the speed potions don't really feel worth crafting at all. The health potions are much better. And lastly, as a small quality of life change for me would be allowing the world to restart automatically, especially if you don't pick up any gears. My base was not located super close to the chronomancer wheel, so sometimes I just need to go reset the time when I would just want to jump back into the biome, and that'll just be a small little change that's nice.
Sure, I said a lot of negative things about the game and got a little frustrated towards the end, but the game is still good. The gameplay feels good and fresh in the beginning of the game. The graphics are fantastic. The soundtrack isn't anything too special, but is it worth it? It's still hard to say.
If you really like in-depth crafting and don't mind the mind-numbing feeling of trying to find that one item you need, or you're a lot better at organizing than me, then you might want to try it out. And I can see this being a great game with some friends. It's a lot more in-depth than a game like Cult of the Lamb and more frustrating with crafting.
I imagine it takes them about 12 to 14 hours to beat the game, and then 15 to 18 hours if you're an achievement hunter. And for a $25 price point, I'd say that's worth it. But I also was lucky enough to receive this game for free, but even with that happening, I'm going to voice my critiques with the game.
I like the story as a whole. Core gameplay inside the biomes isn't bad, it's just not super memorable. Same with the soundtrack. The final boss fight felt so anticlimactic with the music.
But I just had higher expectations for this game that weren't met.
And yeah, that's all. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe as it helps out the channel a lot.
An extra special shout out to the people that still support me on Patreon. Really, that extra support means the world to me. And yeah, that's Wizard with a Gun. I'll see you next time.